G'day to all my friends and family, and welcome to this episode of Jim's 5am Club. It's Sunday and I've taken a drive with my beautiful wife Paula, and we've come up to Nelson Bay just for the day to spend a few hours up here, relax, enjoy some of these sun rays because it's absolutely pouring and cold in Sydney. And it's amazing how just a couple of 100 kilometres away, the weather, the climate is entirely different. Anyway, today I want to go through a book summary like I normally do on Jim's 5am Club. And today is an absolute cracker. It's entitled How to Not Be Wrong by an author known as Jordan Ellenberg. And this book is one of those great books that even people like Bill Gates has read and absolutely loved. So let's delve into some of the key learnings from this book and see what we can glean from this text, knowing that it's material that even somebody like Bill Gates absolutely thrived on and uses in his daily life. So this book talks about mathematics and decision making, and he says that knowing mathematics is like wearing a pair of X-ray specs that enables us to see the revealed hidden structures underneath the messy and chaotic surface of the world that we live in. So what the author here is saying is that if you have a mathematical bent, you can use maths, you can use those proportions, you can use those structures, you can use that logic to help you identify patterns in our everyday lives, and not only identify those patterns, but to unravel those patterns and understand those patterns to be able to make sense of something that looks chaotic, but in actual fact is something that is easier to understand if you apply your mathematics knowledge, if you look for the patterns and you're able to identify sequences and stuff like that. So the author goes on to say that it's important to understand that when you're in a position to reflect, when you're in a position to sit back and think, and you're in a position to evaluate what's going on around you, there is a possibility that sometimes our mental biases are compounding and leading you in the wrong direction. That's a real profound and powerful statement. And the author here actually says that this is one of those statements that Bill Gates absolutely loved when he read this book. So what we're saying is that the more educated you are, the more time you have available to you to mull things over and think about things. You know, it has its benefit, but it also has its disadvantages, because what you can be doing is when you're reflecting, when you're thinking, and when you're evaluating, what you could be doing is you could be taking the mental biases that we all have. We're all infected by different mental biases, depending on how we grew up, the family we grew up in, the culture, the language, the religion, the schools that we went to, the organisations that we've worked for, the education systems along the way, the courses that we've done, all shape the way we see the world and can shape it in a positive way, can shape it in a negative way. But it all depends. But one thing for sure and for certain is that an educated mind can be an advantage, but it can also be a disadvantage in some circumstances. So let's go on and identify a few other learnings from this book. So the first formal point that the author makes is that we use mathematics more than we think, because mathematics is mostly common sense. The great thing about maths, according to this author, is that it provides us with a 100% certainty whether something is true or not true, by being able to deduce and to deduct things based on fact and based on mathematical formulas and sequences. We also subconsciously use the maths and logic that we learned at school to solve a lot more problems than we actually think. I remember when I was at school, and a lot of people would say, well, what's the use of learning this algebra and calculus and proportions and all of these other things, because we're never going to use them ever again in our lives. But what the author here is saying is that's a fallacy. And in some ways, I guess I can see that happening, because the education system of today is a lot different to the education system that I grew up in, where maths was compulsory all the way up to year 12. Whereas these days, people can pick and choose the topics that they do at school, the subjects. And a lot of people, I guess, don't do the sciences anymore, don't do the maths subjects because they're all too hard, and stick to the humanitarian subjects, which they find a little bit easier and a little bit more interesting. But by doing so, they're missing out on an opportunity to learn about patterns, to be able to use formulas and other things that you learn in maths to help them unravel the riddles and the problems in life. The author then goes on to talk about a few of the biases, and one of the biases that he talks about is a thing called the survivorship bias, which creates a mistake of focusing on only the positive results or data points when analysing things. What the author is saying here is that because we live in a world of positive expectancy, there's this pressure put on scientists, put on analysts, and put on businesses to try and find answers, but only positive answers. They only want to focus on the positive answers that support their theories and their assumptions, that support their products. But what we're saying here is that by picking and choosing what we focus on can sometimes lead us to a wrong decision, because our decision making ends up being warped and wrong. And it's just based on the way we see things, or the way we want to see things, which shapes our worldview. And it's all the biases, as we said before, the warping of reality, the confirmation biases that create issues that have first, second and third level consequences that impact our lives in far more ways than what we appreciate and think. The second point that the author says in this book is that we often use probability to assess risk. But the author says here that probability and risk are not the same, which is interesting. So what we'll do is we'll focus on this a little bit more to see what he means. He says that most people tend to confuse probability and risk. You can't use just probability to assess risk. According to this author, you also have to think about how bad potential negative outcomes can come about and how they really look. So if they do occur, and how to take them into account. So there's always a chance of something happening, which is the probability. But the risk is, what are the first, second, and third level consequences of, the outcomes when it happens? We can always say that there's a low chance of a thunderstorm hitting us in the next 5 minutes. But if it does, what impact does it have on me right now, where I'm standing right here, and all these people who are here at this point in time? What are the first, second, and third level consequences of it happening, or the outcomes of when it does happen? So once again, probability is one thing, and risk is something completely different. Risk is the outcome, the potential problems that it can cause. And the last point that comes from this book is where the author says that there are always problems. This is a really interesting point. There are always problems with scientific research, because scientific research in many ways is supported by business, and there are outcomes that business wants to achieve, and in order to achieve those outcomes, they impact, or they can influence, the research and the outcomes of the research in a way that may not be above board, I guess, is one way of looking at it. The other thing that the author talks about is that when it comes to scientific research, we never hear about the unsuccessful studies because they are rarely published. Now, all we get to see are the things that end up working, or the things that are approved, or the things that are trending. But for everything that trends, for every successful entrepreneur, for every successful athlete, there are thousands who have gone before them who have failed. So I guess we need to be realistic and to understand that not everyone is going to be successful. Not every scientific project is going to be successful. Even when business wants them to be successful, we need to make sure that we have the right checks and balances in place to make sure that we don't get manipulated and tricked, I guess, into doing things that we shouldn't really be doing. So this thing that the author talks about is called a survivorship bias. And what researchers often do, what a lot of people do, I've worked in big business all my life, and you know that when it comes to the planning stage or getting things done, people fake results. People will make certain assumptions that will support a particular outcome or a particular decision, knowing fairly well that the chances of the outcomes from that decision are quite remote. I remember working at Telstra many years ago, and the marketing director, Tim Edward, always used to say, he says, "James, I've never been to a marketing presentation where there hasn't been a hockey stick prediction in terms of the sales outcomes from the marketing inputs." So people tend, according to Tim Edward, to overestimate the outcomes and the successes of the marketing efforts just to get it over the line, just to get people to sign off on it. But it's only when we are hard-nosed in our assumptions and we ask the right questions that we're able to reveal the amount of BS that goes into the presentation of these results. Because as we said, researchers often fake results. They often tweak the results and the data to support a particular outcome. And it happens all the time. Don't think that even in the biggest and best organisations that decisions are made on the proper results and on scientific outcomes. In many ways, things are manipulated. And these are the sorts of things that people like Bill Gates understands oh so well. And that's why he's very cautious in the decisions that he makes and the things that he invests in. And the other thing that I learnt as an accountant working for many top tier organisations is that much of the data that we have in our databases is often unclean, and there are often many errors there. Just over the past year, for example, I've been going through my pay slips, my pay advices for the work that I do. And it's amazing at how many errors, should I say, that I've been able to pick up. Because when you've got people, when you've got humans working under pressure, and there are lots of moving parts, and you need to get stuff finished to meet a deadline, then there are chances that errors can come about. So be mindful that even the greatest corporations in the world, even the best analysts, the best systems, have errors in their data, and their data isn't entirely clean, and we've got to be careful with the assumptions that we make and the amount of trust, I guess, we can put on scientific outcomes. Because, as we said, all of these outcomes impact the results. And if you take things for granted, if you take things for face value, then you may get disappointed in the long term. Anyway, thank you very much for joining me on this episode of Jim's 5am Club. As you can see, it's a beautiful, beautiful Sunday up here at Nelson Bay. There are people down here feeding the birds, watching the fish, and just enjoying the sunlight. Whilst in Sydney at the moment, it's dark, it's overcast, it's windy, it's cold, and it's raining. So make the most of what you've got when you've got it, and we'll chat again. And the other thing that I've noticed is that this tree here is just starting to unfurl its leaves. And I guess within a few days, this tree will be completely green, and below it, where that little bit of shade is, will be just a huge amount of shade for people just to get out of the elements. Anyway, take care, wishing you all well, and we'll chat again. Bye for now from Nelson Bay, and I look forward to coming to you again from a different place, from a different location, with a message of empowerment so that we can live, learn, and pass it on. Bye for now.